Chapter 4. Airport. Aliana was almost to the border when Argus appeared in front of her out of nowhere. She gasped and almost tripped over a tree root. The head of security just stood there, staring at her with his many eyes. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. Aliana readied herself. "I have to go, Argus. I have to figure this out." He cocked his head as if to ask, "Where are you going?" Aliana sighed. She'd always been good at reading his body language. "Please, just let me go. I don't want to get you involved." He raised an eyebrow like he was asking, "Why not?" "This is my quest," she explained. "It'll be dangerous, and I don't want to take anyone else down with me." Tears sprang to her eyes, but she blinked them back. It was hitting her now that she might not see camp ever again. Argus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, which was weird considering he avoided touching people if he could. He locked eyes with her. Then he did something that was even more surprising. He cleared his throat. "You will come back." This time she couldn't hold back all her tears. Argus never spoke, but he had risked the humiliation of her seeing the eyeball on his tongue to say that he believed in her. He stepped aside and nodded as if to say, "I'll cover you." She returned the gesture and dashed out of camp and deep into the woods, headed for Manhattan. The airport was crowded to the point where it was hard to breathe. The air stunk of perspiration and too much perfume. Aliana finally reached the desk. "One ticket to LA, please." The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow and looked Aliana up and down. "You alone, little girl?" Aliana sighed. "Yes, and I'm not a little girl." The woman sighed and looked back at her computer, clattering away on the keyboard. "That'll be 305. She met Aliana's gaze as if she expected the number to surprise her. Aliana pulled her backpack off her shoulder and dug out a wad of cash. She placed $400 bills on the counter and locked eyes with the lady. "Don't ask questions, and you can keep the change." The woman was lost for words. She looked at Aliana like she was some sort of criminal. Finally, she printed out the ticket and handed it to Aliana. "You'll have a half-hour layover in Omaha." Aliana nodded, accepting the ticket and walking towards security. The metal detector beeped as her bag went through the scanner. "What's that?" the man asked. "What's what?" Aliana snapped her fingers, triggering the soft breeze. He stared hard at the computer, then shook his head. Must have been the machine acting up. "Move ahead." He jerked his head, urging Aliana forward. She smirked as she snatched her bag off the conveyor belt and made room for her plane. Aliana settled into her seat. So far, so good. If all went well, she would be in LA by the end of the day. Thank the gods the flight to Omaha was uneventful, besides the child who persisted on kicking her seat for the entire flight. Finally, they touched down in Nebraska, and Aliana was glad to be off the plane. She stretched and cracked her stiff neck. This was only her second flight, ever. Her first had been with Percy, headed back from their quest to the underworld. It had only been a year, but it felt like a lifetime ago. She walked the length of the concourse in about 5 minutes, then lounged in one of the cheap cushioned chairs in the waiting area. She sat there for about 10 minutes when she realized that, for the first time in she couldn't remember how long, she was bored. It was awesome. She basked in the bland, empty feeling, tapping her foot and continually shifting her position. Oh, the joys of ADHD. She couldn't sit still for 3 minutes, let alone a half hour. A police officer walked in and struck up a conversation with one of the airport security guards. The two exchanged a few words, and then the airport guy was pointing at her. Aliana shifted uncomfortably. Why would he be pointing at her? Then the events of last summer came flooding back. In St. Louis, she had made an appearance on the local news. The police had started searching their files for her. Apparently, they hadn't given up on their search after she and Percy's names were cleared. And now they'd found her. She tried to get up nonchalantly and started walking towards the door. She wouldn't be taking the plane after all. As she approached the automatic glass doors, she noticed the reflection of a police officer following her. She took a deep breath and waited for the door to open. She walked out of the building steadily, turned the corner, and started running. She was halfway to the rental cars by the time the officer caught up to her. He grasped her arm, but she jerked it out of reach and poured in on the speed. Her legs ached and her lungs hurt, but she kept going. She risked a glance over her shoulder, and when she turned her gaze back to in front of her, a lady with way too much luggage had just exited the airport. Before she could react, Aliana collided with the pile of bags, tripping and tumbling to the ground with the tackled luggage. The police officer appeared above her, panting and sweating. He reached down and gripped her upper arm, jerking her to her feet. "You're coming with me, Miss Breck."